Get off my property or I'm calling the cops! That's what I shouted at Helen Garrett when she blocked my construction truck on the land I bought just outside her HOA's boundary. I'd checked the paperwork, confirmed with the county. I was completely outside her jurisdiction, but she still showed up, demanding I follow her rules on land she had absolutely no authority over. My blood boiled watching her threaten to sue me for daring to renovate my own house. What happened next changed everything for every resident in that HOA. Drop a comment where you're watching from because this story gets absolutely insane. It started on a Tuesday morning in late March, the kind of crisp spring day that makes you glad to be alive. I was standing in front of what used to be my grandfather's house, a 2-story craftsman-style home that had been sitting empty for 3 years since he passed. The place needed work, but the bones were solid and the location was perfect. I'm Cole Brennan, 39 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years as a civil engineer specializing in land planning and infrastructure. When I inherited this house, I pulled every document from the county recorder's office, cross-referenced the plat maps with GPS coordinates, and hired a licensed surveyor to verify the boundaries. The results were crystal clear. My property sat on 4.7 acres, located 150 feet outside the Pinewood Ridge HOA boundary line. I had the deed chain going back to 1952, the original survey stakes, and county confirmation in writing. That morning, I was meeting with my framing contractor to stake out the foundation work when I heard a car door slam behind me. I turned around and saw a silver Lexus SUV pulled up at the edge of my driveway, and 3 people were walking toward me with purposeful strides. The woman in front was tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a navy blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. She had that unmistakable air of someone who'd spent years telling people what to do and never hearing the word no. Behind her were 2 men in their 60s, both wearing khakis and polo shirts with the Pinewood Ridge HOA logo embroidered on the chest. They looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between her and the ground. The woman stopped about 10 feet from me and crossed her arms. I'm Helen Garrett, president of the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association. You need to stop all construction immediately. This property is subject to our architectural review standards, and you haven't submitted any plans for approval. Her voice was controlled, businesslike, but there was an edge underneath. I kept my voice level. Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA. I've verified the boundaries with the county and had it surveyed by a licensed professional. I'm well outside your jurisdiction. She didn't blink. Our records show differently. In 2018, the board voted to adopt a community viewshed covenant amendment. Any property visible from our community roads falls under our architectural standards. Your renovations will directly impact our property values. I'm giving you 72 hours to submit your plans, or we'll file for a preliminary injunction. I felt a cold knot form in my chest. This wasn't just overreach. This was someone rewriting the rules to fit her agenda. A viewshed covenant doesn't override property boundaries. You can't retroactively apply covenants to properties that were never part of your original plat. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a folded document, handing it to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is a certified copy of our amended covenant, filed with the county clerk in 2018. Section 4.3 establishes the viewshed protection zone extending 500 feet beyond our recorded boundary. Your property is well within that radius. I unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the text. It looked official, complete with legal language and reference numbers, but something felt off. The section she cited talked about visual impact assessments and community aesthetic preservation, but the language was vague. There were no surveyor references, no meets and bounds descriptions, nothing that would hold up under scrutiny. More importantly, I'd pulled every covenant from the county last week, and this document hadn't been in the file. I looked back up at her, keeping my expression neutral. I'll need to verify this with the county. If this is legitimate, it should be on record with the same file number as your original covenants. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Irritation or something sharper. Mr. Brennan, I've been the president of this HOA for 12 years. I don't appreciate having my authority questioned. You're welcome to waste your time challenging us in court, but we have far more resources and patience than you do. We've already retained counsel. One of the men behind her cleared his throat softly. Helen, maybe we should give him time to review the documents with his attorney. She turned her head just slightly, and the look she gave him was cold enough to freeze water. He immediately looked down and didn't say another word. I handed the paper back to her. I'll be in touch with the county this afternoon. If there's a legitimate legal issue, I'll address it, but I'm not stopping work based on a document I can't verify. Helen's jaw tightened, and for just a second, I saw the mask slip. This wasn't about rules or property values. This was personal. You have 72 hours, Mr. Brennan. After that, you'll be hearing from our attorney. She turned and walked back to her car, the two men trailing behind her like shadows. I watched the Lexus pull away and felt that familiar engineer's instinct kick in, the need to verify, to dig deeper. Something about that document didn't add up, and Helen's reaction when I questioned it told me everything. She was hiding something, or at least banking on me not checking her story. I pulled out my phone and dialed the county recorder's office, asking them to pull every filed document related to Pinewood Ridge HOA since 2015. The clerk said it would take a few hours, but she'd email me the full file by end of business. As I hung up, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. There was an old wooden fence post at the edge of my property line, half rotted and leaning at an angle, with a faded metal survey marker bolted to the top. I walked over and knelt down, brushing away the dirt and dead leaves. The marker was stamped with a date, July 1952, and a surveyor's registration number. Below that, in smaller letters, were the words, Private Easement, County Road 47, Grantor Reserved Rights. I stared at it for a long moment. County Road 47 was the only paved access road into Pinewood Ridge. It ran along the western edge of my property before turning into the HOA's main entrance. I'd always assumed it was a public road, but if this marker was accurate, then that road wasn't public at all. It was private, and the rights belonged to whoever owned this land, my grandfather, and now, me. That 72-hour deadline was ticking, and I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. By 4 p.m. that same afternoon, I was sitting in my truck in the county recorder's office parking lot, staring at my laptop screen with a mix of disbelief and cold satisfaction. The clerk had sent me a complete digital archive of every document related to Pinewood Ridge HOA filed since 2010. It took me less than an hour to confirm what I'd suspected. Helen Garrett's viewshed covenant amendment didn't exist. There was no filing from 2018, no amended covenants, no expanded boundary language. The most recent document on record was a minor bylaw update from 2016 about late fee schedules. Helen had handed me a fake document with enough confidence to make most people believe it was real. But I wasn't most people, and now I had proof she was lying. What I found next was even more interesting. Buried in a 1952 warranty deed was the easement language I'd glimpsed on that old survey marker. My grandfather, William Brennan, had sold a parcel of land to the county for the construction of County Road 47, but he'd retained an appurtenant easement, a permanent right-of-way that transferred with ownership of his remaining property. The language was dense, written in that old-fashioned legal style, but the meaning was clear. Grantor and heirs reserve exclusive control and access rights over said roadway, with county usage permitted by revocable license only. In plain English, my family owned the road. The county maintained it and had permission to use it, but we controlled access. When Pinewood Ridge HOA was established in 1985, they'd built their entire community assuming County Road 47 was a public road. They'd never secured their own easement, never negotiated access rights, never put anything in writing. For 40 years, they'd been using a road they didn't own, and no one had ever questioned it. I sat back and let that sink in. Helen Garrett's entire community depended on a road I now controlled. Every resident, every delivery truck, every emergency vehicle, they all used my property to get in and out. If the easement was still valid, I had leverage she couldn't ignore, but I needed to verify it was enforceable before I made any moves. I pulled out my phone and called Franklin Ward, my neighbor to the east and a retired real estate attorney who'd lived in the area for 30 years. Franklin answered on the third ring, his voice warm and scratchy. "Cole, good to hear from you. How's the renovation coming?" I gave him the short version of my encounter with Helen, and he chuckled darkly. "Helen Garrett. Yeah, I know her well. She tried the same stunt on me 10 years ago. Wanted to fine me for painting my fence the wrong shade of white. I told her where she could stick her color chart." I smiled despite myself. Franklin, I found an old easement document from 1952 that suggests my family owns the access rights to County Road 47. Does that sound familiar? There was a pause, and I could hear the gears turning. Your grandfather's easement. Yeah. I remember Bill joking about it, said he could shut down half the county if he ever felt like it. Cole, if that easement's still enforceable, you're sitting on one hell of a trump card. But you need to verify the county never claimed it through adverse possession or eminent domain. Have you checked the title history? I hadn't. But that was next on my list. Not yet. If it's valid, what are my rights? Franklin's voice turned serious. If it's valid, and there's been no legal transfer, you own that road in every way that matters. You could gate it, restrict access, charge tolls if you wanted to. The HOA would have to negotiate an easement agreement with you, on your terms, or they'd be trespassing. But listen to me carefully. If you go down this road, Helen's going to come at you with everything she's got. She doesn't back down, and she doesn't fight fair. You need to be absolutely certain before you challenge her. I looked across the street at the old courthouse, its stone facade glowing in the afternoon sun. She's already threatened to sue me for renovating my own house. I'm not backing down. Franklin sighed, but there was approval in it. Good. Then get everything documented and be ready. And Cole, check those HOA bylaws carefully. If Helen's willing to fake a covenant amendment, I'd bet she's pulled other tricks. Sometimes these rules they claim exist were never properly voted on in the first place. That lined up with what I was already thinking. I thanked him and hung up. Then opened the bylaws document and started reading line by line. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. The bylaws clearly stated that any covenant amendments required a 2/3 membership vote, followed by formal county recording within 30 days. There was no record of any vote in 2018, no meeting minutes, no signed resolutions. Helen had invented a rule out of thin air. Even better, the architectural review section explicitly stated it only applied to properties within the platted and recorded boundaries of Pinewood Ridge HOA as filed with the county on March 15, 1985. My property wasn't in that plat, which meant Helen had zero authority over my renovations, period. I closed the laptop and sat there, feeling that cold clarity that comes when you know you're right and you have the proof. Helen had miscalculated badly. She'd assumed I was just another homeowner who'd fold under pressure, someone who'd comply rather than fight, but she'd picked the wrong person, and more critically, the wrong property. I started the truck and headed home, already planning my next steps. Tomorrow I'd pull the full title history for County Road 47, confirm no adverse possession claims existed, and verify the easement was still enforceable. Then I'd send Helen a polite, professional letter explaining that I was proceeding with my renovations. Her fake covenant had no legal standing, and if she wanted to continue this discussion, she could do it through an attorney. But tonight, I needed to document everything while it was fresh. When I got back to the house, I grabbed my camera and walked over to that survey marker. I took detailed photos from every angle, close-ups of the stamped text, wide shots showing its position on the property line, and a short video where I narrated the exact wording and date. If this turned into a legal battle, I wanted every piece of evidence preserved and ready. As I finished, I looked down the length of County Road 47, watching the sun dip below the tree line and cast long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere past that curve, 30-some families were going about their evening routines, completely unaware that the road they drove on every single day didn't belong to them. They had no idea their HOA president had been operating on bluff and intimidation, or that she'd just threatened someone who had the power to shut down their only way in or out. I finally had leverage. Real leverage. The kind that couldn't be argued away or buried under fake documents. And Helen Garrett had absolutely no idea what was coming. The next morning, I was back at the county recorder's office by 8 a.m. with a clear mission. I needed the complete chain of title for County Road 47, every deed transfer, every easement filing, every document that touched that piece of property from 1952 to now. The clerk pulled the records and handed me a stack of papers about 2 inches thick. I found a corner table and worked through them methodically, cross-referencing dates and file numbers. 2 hours later, I had my answer. The county had never filed for adverse possession, never claimed ownership through eminent domain, never done anything that would invalidate my grandfather's easement. The road had been maintained by the county for 73 years, but the Brennan family had owned it the entire time. I made copies of everything, organized them chronologically, and added them to my growing evidence file. Next stop was the office of Richard Moss, a land surveyor I'd worked with on previous projects. Richard had a reputation for being thorough and unshakable in court. Exactly what I needed. I laid out the situation and showed him the old easement documents. He pulled up a satellite map on his computer and traced County Road 47 with his finger. If this is accurate, the HOA has no alternate access. This road is it. When do you need the survey? I thought about Helen's deadline, now shrunk to about 48 hours. As soon as possible. I'll pay for a rush job. Richard nodded. I can have a crew out this afternoon. 2 days and you'll have a full report with GPS coordinates, boundary markers, legal descriptions, everything you need. I shook his hand, feeling the pieces fall into place. If I was going to stand up to Helen, I needed to be bulletproof. Every detail documented by professionals who couldn't be questioned. When I got home, I found a white envelope tucked into my front door. No postage, no return address, just my name in neat block letters. I opened it standing on the porch. Inside was a single sheet on Pinewood Ridge HOA letterhead, signed by Helen Garrett. The letter was short and sharp. Mr. Brennan, this is your final notice to cease all construction activities and submit your renovation plans to the Architectural Review Board within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to an injunction, monetary damages, and attorney fees. We have retained the law firm of Caldwell and Associates. Any further communication should be directed to our legal counsel. At the bottom was a phone number and the name Jonathan Caldwell. I read it twice, standing in the cool morning air, and felt something settle inside me. Helen was escalating, bringing in lawyers, trying to intimidate me into submission, but she was also creating a paper trail, documenting her own overreach with every threatening word. I photographed the letter and sat down at my kitchen table to draft a response. I kept it professional, factual, stripped of emotion. Dear Ms. Garrett, I received your letter dated today regarding construction on my property. As previously stated, my property is not located within the boundaries of Pinewood Ridge HOA, as confirmed by county records and professional survey. Your architectural review process does not apply. Additionally, I have reviewed the covenants and bylaws on file with the county and found no record of the viewshed amendment you referenced. If such an amendment exists, please provide the date of the membership vote and the county filing number. I am proceeding with my legally permitted renovations. If you wish to pursue legal action, I will respond through the court system. I printed it, signed it, and drove to the post office to send it certified mail. The return receipt would prove she'd received it, prove exactly what I'd said and when. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a kind of quiet certainty building, the kind that comes from knowing you've played every move correctly while the other side operates on nothing but threats. That afternoon, Richard's survey crew arrived and spent 3 hours measuring, marking, photographing every inch of the property line. I watched them work with a kind of professional admiration. The way they cross-referenced old markers with modern GPS, the way they documented everything in triplicate. When they finished, the crew chief handed me a preliminary sketch. Mr. Brennan, your property line is exactly where you said. You're 150 feet outside the HOA boundary. And that old easement marker is spot on. We'll have the full report in 48 hours. But if anyone questions your boundaries, you can show them this. I thanked him and watched them load their equipment as they drove away. I noticed something that made my pulse quicken slightly. A silver Lexus SUV was parked on the shoulder of County Road 47, maybe 100 yards down from my driveway. Even from that distance, I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, motionless, watching. I stood there for a moment, just looking back at her, because I knew exactly who it was. Helen Garrett wasn't just escalating through lawyers and letters anymore. She was watching me directly, personally. There was something unsettling about it. The way she sat so still. The way she didn't try to hide or drive away when she realized I'd spotted her. This wasn't professional anymore. This was personal. She was trying to intimidate me, trying to make me feel watched, cornered, pressured, but all she was really doing was showing me how desperate she'd become. I walked back inside calmly, pulled out my camera with the telephoto lens, and took a clear shot of her car from my front window. The license plate was visible. The timestamp automatic. Another piece of evidence. Another mistake on her part. I saved the photo and labeled it. Surveillance. Day 3, 4:40 p.m. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and just breathed for a minute, letting my mind work through what this meant. Helen wasn't just trying to control my property. She was trying to control me, to make me afraid, to make me back down through sheer pressure. She couldn't stand that I existed outside her authority, and she was willing to cross lines to bring me back in. That told me more about her than any legal document ever could. She thought watching me would rattle me, thought I'd fold if she made it personal, but she was wrong. I'd let her watch. I'd document every second of it, and when the time came, I'd use it all against her. For now, I had work to do, and she could sit out there in her Lexus as long as she wanted. It wouldn't change a damn thing. 3 days later, I got an email from Helen Garrett that made me smile despite myself. The subject line read, "Emergency HOA meeting, your attendance requested." The body was formal, almost bureaucratic, informing me that the Pinewood Ridge Board had scheduled a special meeting for Thursday evening at 7 p.m. to discuss ongoing community concerns and property boundary disputes. My attendance was strongly encouraged, so that all parties could present their perspectives in a civil and constructive manner. Franklin called me within an hour of receiving it. "Cole, this is a setup. She's going to try to shame you in front of the whole community, make you look like the bad guy. You don't have to go." I thought about it, then made my decision. No, I want to. I've got the survey, the easement documents, everything I need. If she wants to make this public, let's make it public. Thursday evening arrived clear and cool. I drove to the Pinewood Ridge Community Center, a small brick building at the heart of the development, and parked in the visitor lot. There were already about 30 cars there. Inside, the main room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board sat. Helen was in the center, flanked by 4 other members, all looking serious and official. The room was nearly full, residents chatting quietly, some glancing my way as I walked in. I took a seat in the back row, my leather document folder resting on my lap. Helen noticed me immediately, and I saw her lean over to whisper something to the man beside her, a heavy-set guy with a name tag that read, "Board Treasurer." At 7 p.m. exactly, Helen stood and called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have an urgent matter to address regarding a property owner conducting unauthorized construction in violation of our community standards. Mr. Cole Brennan has refused to comply with our architectural review process despite repeated requests, and his actions threaten the integrity and property values of our entire community." The room went quiet, and I felt eyes turning toward me. Helen continued, her voice calm and measured. "Mr. Brennan claims his property is not part of our HOA. But as many of you know, our covenants include viewshed protections that extend beyond our legal boundaries. His renovation project, which includes significant structural changes visible from our roads, directly impacts our shared environment. We've tried to work with him privately, but he has refused every attempt at compromise." She paused, letting that settle, then gestured toward me. "Mr. Brennan, since you've chosen to attend, would you like to explain why you believe the rules don't apply to you?" I stood slowly, walked to the front of the room, and kept my voice even. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Ms. Garrett, I'd like to clarify a few things." I opened my folder and pulled out my property deed. This is my deed, recorded with the county in 1952 and transferred to me through inheritance. It clearly shows my property is located 150 feet outside the platted boundaries of Pinewood Ridge HOA. I held it up, then set it on the table in front of her. This is the original plat map filed in 1985. You can see my property is not within it. And this is a professional survey completed 3 days ago, confirming those boundaries with GPS precision. Helen's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. I continued. Ms. Garrett claimed a viewshed covenant amendment gives her authority over my property. I've reviewed every document filed with the county since 2010. No such amendment exists. There was no membership vote, no formal filing. The document presented to me does not appear in any county record. The room erupted in whispers, people turning to each other, confusion spreading. Helen stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Brennan." I kept my tone neutral. "Then provide the county filing number." Show the date of the vote. If this amendment is real, it's public record. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. One of the other board members, a younger woman with dark hair, spoke up quietly. Helen, do we have that filing number? Helen didn't answer. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I pulled out the final document. There's one more thing everyone should know. County Road 47, the road you all use to access this community, is not a public road. It's a private easement. According to verified county records, my family owns the access rights. The county maintains it, but ownership never transferred. For 40 years, this HOA has been using my property without a formal easement agreement. The whispers turned into shocked murmurs. Helen's face had gone pale. That's not possible. That road is county maintained. I shook my head. County maintained doesn't mean county owned. I have the full chain of title, verified by the county recorder. I can provide copies to anyone who wants them. I looked around the room. I didn't come here to threaten anyone. I came to set the record straight. Ms. Garrett has been operating outside her legal authority. I'm not going to be bullied based on rules that don't exist. If this board wants to continue, we can do it through attorneys and the court system. I closed my folder and walked toward the door. Behind me, the room dissolved into chaos. Voices rose, questions were shouted at Helen, confusion and anger spreading like wildfire through the crowd. I heard one man demand, Helen, is this true? Do we not own that road? Another voice, sharper, cut through. Did you lie about the covenant? Helen's voice tried to rise above it all, scrambling to regain control, but the authority she'd wielded so effortlessly was gone. The residents weren't looking at her like a leader anymore. They were looking at her like someone who'd just been caught. I stepped outside into the cool night air and paused for a moment, listening to the chaos bleeding through the walls behind me. For years, Helen Garrett had ruled this community through intimidation and manufactured authority. Tonight, in front of everyone she'd controlled, that illusion shattered, and she had no one to blame but herself. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a flood of emails, most from residents asking for copies of the easement documents or wanting to know what happened next. One email stood out. It was from Troy Simmons, the board member I'd seen at that first confrontation with Helen. The subject line read, "We need to talk, privately." I opened it and read carefully. Mr. Brennan, my name is Troy Simmons, and I serve on the Pinewood Ridge Board. After last night's meeting, I did some digging into our records and found several inconsistencies that concern me deeply. I believe Helen has been operating beyond her authority for quite some time. I'd like to meet with you off the record to discuss what I've found. Please call me at your earliest convenience. He left a phone number, and I stared at it for a moment. This could be a trap, but something about the tone felt genuine. I called Franklin first. He listened, then said simply, Troy's a good guy. Been reluctant about the board for years. If he's reaching out, he means it. Just be careful and document everything. That was enough for me. I called Troy and we agreed to meet at a coffee shop in the next town over. Somewhere no one from Pinewood Ridge would see us. I got there first, ordered black coffee, and sat in a corner booth. Troy arrived 10 minutes later, thin, graying, nervous. He slid into the seat across from me and didn't waste time. I've been on that board for 5 years, and I've watched Helen run it like her personal kingdom. After what you said last night, I went back through our financial records and meeting minutes. I found things that don't add up. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were bank statements, invoices, internal emails. 3 years ago, Helen pushed through a special assessment for road maintenance and landscaping. We collected $32,000 from residents. But look at these invoices. He pointed to a series of payments. Half that money went to a company called Garrett Property Services. I looked it up. It's a shell company owned by Helen. She's been funneling HOA funds into her own pocket for years. I felt ice settle in my chest. This wasn't about control anymore. This was criminal fraud. Have you reported this? Troy shook his head. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. If she fabricated documents to go after you, what else has she done? I'm worried that if I bring this to the board, she'll bury it or come after me. I leaned forward. Troy, this is fraud. You need to take this to the county district attorney. They'll investigate independently. He looked relieved, like he'd been carrying this weight alone too long. I will, and I want you to take copies of this with you. If something happens to me or these records disappear, I need someone else to have them. I nodded. I'll make sure they get to the right people, but keep the originals locked up somewhere safe. Troy thanked me, and for the first time since I'd met anyone connected to that HOA, I saw someone who genuinely wanted to do the right thing. I'm sorry about how she's treated you, he added quietly. A lot of us are. I appreciated it, but my mind was already moving ahead. If Helen was desperate enough to commit fraud, she was desperate enough to do worse. That afternoon, I installed a second set of security cameras around my property, positioning them to cover the driveway, the construction site, and the stretch of County Road 47 that bordered my land. As I was mounting the last camera, I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the back corner of my property, leading up to where I'd stacked construction materials under a tarp. Someone had been here. I walked over slowly, that familiar engineer's instinct kicking in, analyzing before reacting. I pulled back the tarp and felt anger rise hot and sharp in my chest. Several bags of cement had been slashed open, contents spilling into the dirt. Paint cans were overturned, lids pried off, the expensive exterior paint I'd ordered pooling uselessly on the ground. Tools were scattered, some bent deliberately, others missing entirely. This wasn't random. This was targeted, calculated, meant to cost me money and time. The silence around me felt oppressive, like the air itself had thickened. Someone had stood right here in the dark, on my property, destroying my work while I slept. I pulled out my phone with hands that weren't quite steady and photographed everything, then called the county sheriff's office. The deputy who arrived 40 minutes later was a calm, methodical man named Andrew Dalton. He examined the scene carefully, kneeling to inspect the tire tracks. Looks like someone wanted to send you a message. Any idea who? I told him about the dispute with Helen and the HOA, keeping my tone neutral, letting the facts speak. Dalton nodded, taking notes. I'll file this as criminal mischief and trespassing. If your cameras caught anything, send me the footage. I thanked him and went back inside to review the recordings. The timestamp showed someone on my property at 2:15 a.m., just hours after the HOA meeting. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, face obscured, but they moved with purpose, knew exactly where the materials were, worked quickly and deliberately. I couldn't prove it was Helen, but the pattern was unmistakable. She'd escalated from threats and fake documents to actual crime. I saved the footage and sent it to Sheriff Dalton, then sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. The vandalized site, the slashed materials, the deliberate destruction. It all felt like a violation deeper than property damage. Someone had come onto my land in the middle of the night to hurt me, to intimidate me, to make me afraid. And the worst part was knowing it wouldn't stop here. Helen had crossed a line, and people who cross that line once rarely stop. I opened a new document and started drafting a formal letter to the county district attorney, attaching everything Troy had given me, outlining the fake covenant, the financial fraud, the vandalism, the entire pattern of abuse. This wasn't just about defending my property anymore. This was about stopping someone who'd been hurting people for years, someone who believed she was untouchable. I hit send and leaned back, feeling the weight of what came next settle over me. Helen Garrett had turned this into a war, and she had no idea what she'd unleashed, because I wasn't backing down, and I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. The law was on my side. The evidence was mounting, and sooner or later, she was going to answer for everything she'd done. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was personal. 4 days after the vandalism, I was working on the foundation forms when I heard tires crunching on gravel. I looked up and saw Sheriff Dalton's patrol car pulling into my driveway, and behind him was an unmarked sedan. Dalton got out first, his expression neutral but serious, and a woman in a dark suit followed. She was maybe 40, with sharp eyes and the kind of posture that screamed authority. Dalton walked over and nodded. "Mr. Brennan, this is Detective Sarah Vance with the County District Attorney's Office. She'd like to ask you a few questions about your report." I wiped the dust off my hands and shook hers. "Of course. What can I help you with?" Vance pulled out a small notebook. "We've received your complaint regarding Helen Garrett and the Pinewood Ridge HOA, along with the financial documents provided by Troy Simmons. We're opening a formal investigation into possible fraud and misuse of community funds. I wanted to follow up on the vandalism and ask if you've had any further contact with Ms. Garrett since filing your report." I shook my head. No direct contact. But I did receive this 2 days ago. I pulled out my phone and showed her an email Helen had sent through her attorney, Jonathan Caldwell. The subject line read, "Cease and desist. Final warning." The body was predictably threatening, demanding I stop making false and defamatory statements, and warning that continued harassment would result in a civil lawsuit. Vance read it, then asked, "Did you respond?" I nodded. "Through my attorney. I told them I stand by every statement, that all my claims are supported by county records, and that I'm cooperating with law enforcement. If they want to sue me, I'll countersue for harassment, trespassing, and vandalism." Vance smiled faintly. "Good. Keep that paper trail. Now, I need to ask you something sensitive. We reviewed your security footage and pulled traffic records from county cameras near your property. A vehicle matching Helen Garrett's Lexus was recorded driving past at 1:50 a.m. on the night of the vandalism, heading toward your house. 20 minutes later, heading back out. Do you have footage showing the vehicle entering your property?" My chest tightened. I pulled up the camera app and found the timestamp. The video was grainy in the low light, but clear enough. Headlights turning into my driveway. A vehicle matching Helen's Lexus pulling up near the construction site. A figure getting out dressed in dark clothing. The person moved quickly to the materials, spent maybe 5 minutes destroying them, then got back in and drove away. I handed the phone to Vance. She watched twice, zooming in on one frame where the license plate was partially visible. She looked at Dalton, and something unspoken passed between them. "Mr. Brennan, this is enough to bring her in for questioning. Combined with the financial irregularities and the harassment pattern, we have grounds for charges." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. "What kind of charges?" Vance closed her notebook. "At minimum, criminal mischief and trespassing, potentially fraud related to misuse of HOA funds. If we prove she fabricated official documents, that's forgery. Once we move forward, things will get messy. Helen Garrett has connections in this county, and she'll fight hard." I met her eyes. "I'm ready." Vance nodded. "We'll be in touch this week. Keep your cameras running. Don't engage with her or the board, and document everything. If she contacts you directly, let us know immediately." That afternoon, Franklin called, his voice urgent. "Cole, have you seen what's happening at the HOA?" I hadn't. "What's going on?" He sounded almost gleeful. "Word got out about the fraud investigation. Someone leaked it, probably Troy, and now there's an emergency meeting being called to remove Helen from the board. People are furious. They're demanding a full audit and talking about a class action lawsuit for misappropriation of funds. It's falling apart over there." I sat down slowly. The community Helen had controlled for 12 years was turning on her, and she had no one to blame but herself. "Does she know about the investigation?" Franklin paused. "I'd bet she does. The DA's office doesn't move quietly. Cole, be careful. Cornered animals do dangerous things." I thanked him and hung up, then walked to the window and looked out toward County Road 47. The road was quiet, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, but I knew what was coming. Helen's empire was crumbling, and I wanted to make sure I was still standing when it collapsed. 2 hours later, just as the sun dipped below the tree line, I saw her car. The silver Lexus pulled up slowly to the edge of my property line and stopped. Helen got out, and this time she didn't try to hide. She stood there in the fading light, a silhouette against the pale sky, and she just looked at my house, not with anger, not with defiance, but with something quieter, something that looked almost like resignation. The air was still, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves and the crunch of gravel under her shoes as she shifted her weight. I stood at the window watching her, my phone in hand recording, but I didn't feel the need to rush or react. She wasn't here to fight. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, nothing left to say, and maybe for the first time in years. She understood what it felt like to lose control. She stood there for 2 minutes, maybe longer, just staring across the distance between us. Then she turned, got back in her car, and drove away slowly, the taillights disappearing down the curve of the road. I saved the video and sent it to Detective Vance with a short message. "Helen Garrett at my property line, 6:20 p.m., no contact made." Vance replied within 10 minutes. "Noted. We're moving forward with charges this week. Stay safe." I read that message and set the phone down. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that settles after a storm has passed, but before you're sure it's really over. I locked the doors, checked the cameras, and sat down in the dimming light. Helen Garrett had ruled her little kingdom with threats and fabrications, and now it was all coming down. Tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, she'd be formally charged. Her name would be on public record, her reputation destroyed, her authority gone, and all because she couldn't accept that someone had said no. I leaned back and closed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion and the weight lift just slightly. The fight wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. Helen was running out of moves, and I was still standing. That was enough for now. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the county courthouse watching Helen Garrett stand before a judge at her preliminary hearing. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled and formal, filled with Pinewood Ridge residents who'd come to watch their former HOA president answer for what she'd done. Helen stood next to her attorney, Jonathan Caldwell, looking smaller somehow, diminished. Her perfectly styled hair and tailored suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face, or the reality that her authority had completely collapsed. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Morrison, reviewed the charges with calm precision. Ms. Garrett, you are charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief, 1 count of criminal trespass, and 3 counts of fraud related to misappropriation of homeowner association funds totaling $32,000. How do you plead? Her attorney answered. Not guilty, Your Honor. Judge Morrison nodded. Bail is set at $20,000. You are prohibited from contacting Cole Brennan or any Pinewood Ridge board members pending trial. You must step down immediately as HOA president. Do you understand? Helen's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. As Helen walked past me toward the exit, she didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. She just kept her eyes forward, moving through the crowd of residents who parted silently. Some looked angry, others disappointed, a few almost sympathetic, but no one spoke to her. No one defended her, and that silence said everything. Outside, Detective Vance caught up with me. Mr. Brennan, the DA's office is moving forward with civil restitution as well. The residents are filing a class action to recover the misappropriated funds. We've also confirmed the viewshed covenant was never filed with the county, which supports forgery if we pursue it. I nodded. What happens next? Vance glanced back. She'll likely take a plea deal. The evidence is solid. Best case, probation and community service. Worst case, jail time and full restitution. 2 days later, I received a letter from the new interim HOA president, James Patterson, requesting a meeting to negotiate a formal easement agreement. Mr. Brennan, the residents of Pinewood Ridge recognize we have been using your property without authorization. We would like to establish a legal easement that protects your rights while allowing continued access. We are prepared to offer fair compensation, including legal costs and annual maintenance contributions. We hope to resolve this amicably. I called Franklin and read him the letter. He laughed. They're scared. Cole, they know you could shut down that road tomorrow. Now you negotiate on your terms. I drafted a response outlining my conditions. The HOA could use County Road 47 under a formal agreement, but on my terms. No commercial use, annual maintenance fees paid to me, and a clause allowing me to revoke access if violated. I also required a public apology and a guarantee that no architectural review demands would ever be made on my property. James Patterson agreed to everything within 48 hours. A week later, I sat in a conference room with James, Troy Simmons, 2 other board members, and both our attorneys, and signed the easement agreement. It was formal, legally binding, and gave me exactly what I needed. As we shook hands, James looked at me with respect. Mr. Brennan, I apologize on behalf of the community for what Helen put you through. What she did was inexcusable, and we're grateful you're willing to work with us. I appreciated the gesture. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to renovate my house in peace. Troy spoke up quietly. You did us all a favor. Helen abused her power for years, and no one had the courage to stand up to her. You showed us it was possible. I left that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. Helen had tried to control me, threatened me, vandalized my property, and lied to an entire community. In the end, she lost everything. Her reputation destroyed, her authority gone, facing criminal charges that would follow her forever. Meanwhile, I had my property, my rights, and a legally binding agreement that protected both. Justice wasn't always fast, and it wasn't always dramatic, but when it finally came, it was absolute. 6 months after the preliminary hearing, Helen Garrett took a plea deal. She pled guilty to 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of criminal mischief in exchange for dropping the trespassing and forgery charges. The judge sentenced her to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay full restitution of $32,000 to the Pinewood Ridge HOA, plus an additional $15,000 in fines and penalties. She was also permanently banned from serving on any homeowner association board in the county. I wasn't there for the sentencing. I didn't need to be. Franklin called me afterward and gave me the details, his voice carrying a quiet satisfaction. She looked broken, cold, completely defeated. Her attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated community servant who made some poor choices, but the judge wasn't buying it. Justice was served. I thanked him and hung up, then walked outside to look at what I'd built over the last 6 months. The renovation was complete. The house my grandfather had left me was transformed. A beautiful blend of original craftsman character and modern functionality. New electrical, updated plumbing, a kitchen that would make any chef jealous, and a back deck that overlooked 4 acres of open land. The structure was solid, the work was professional, and every permit was properly filed and approved. No one had questioned my right to build it, and no one ever would again. The easement agreement with Pinewood Ridge was working exactly as intended. The HOA paid me $1,200 annually for road maintenance. They respected the no commercial use clause, and I'd had 0 interference from the board. James Patterson had proven to be a reasonable, transparent leader, and the community had undergone its own kind of renovation. Financial audits, new bylaws, term limits for board members, and a culture shift away from the authoritarian control Helen had normalized. Troy Simmons had been elected treasurer, and he'd instituted monthly financial reports available to all residents. People trusted their HOA again, and that trust had been earned through accountability. I was standing on the front porch one cool October afternoon when I saw a car pull up, not in my driveway, but parked respectfully at the edge of the easement. A woman got out, someone I didn't recognize, maybe mid-30s with a friendly face. She waved and walked over. "Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Angela Morrison. I'm moving into Pinewood Ridge next month, and I wanted to thank you." I was surprised. "Thank me for what?" She smiled. "For standing up to Helen Garrett. I almost didn't buy my house because of the stories I heard about how controlling the HOA was, but when I found out what you did, how you held her accountable, it made me feel like this was a community worth joining. You showed people that no one is above the law, not even someone who acts like they own the place." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I'm glad it worked out. Welcome to the neighborhood." She thanked me again and drove off, and I stood there for a moment feeling something I hadn't expected: pride. Not in winning, but in what the fight had meant. This whole situation started because someone thought they could control me, could bully me into submission with fake rules and manufactured authority, but I didn't back down. I did my research. I documented everything. I followed the law, and I held the line. And in the end, the system worked. Justice was slow. It was frustrating. It required patience and precision, but it was real. Helen Garrett lost everything because she believed she was untouchable, and I rebuilt everything because I knew my rights and refused to surrender them. The house behind me stood as proof that when you stand on solid ground, legally and morally, no amount of intimidation can move you. And that lesson, that sense of reclaiming what was rightfully mine, was worth every difficult moment. If you've ever faced someone who thought their power made them untouchable, I hope this story reminded you that justice is possible. Know your rights, document everything, and never back down from what's legally yours. For more stories like this, follow HOA Chronicles. Drop a comment with your story, and let's keep exposing the truth. Justice happens when people refuse to stay silent.